Hey guys, this is Eric Wangener with Wangener Racing. A little video today is like a prequel for what's going to happen this week. Today, as I'm filming, it's Tuesday, but by the time you guys probably see this video, it'll be Wednesday. On Thursday, I'm dynoing this engine. I'm going to tell you what I did before, what's been changed, and what it is now. I got a bunch of junk up here just so I can remind me to take it to the dyno. Because you remember, I don't own my own dyno. I'm trying to save for that, but not there yet. So, but if this isn't what you're interested in, you're like, what's going on? What else are you going to have videos over? Over there and there. Those are AFR 205 small block Ford heads. I flowed those, and I've got a video already for those. That'll probably be aired on Friday. And that one was shocked the shit out of me because they did really good. And then I've got another video about some small block Ford Pro Comp heads, some small block Chrysler heads I still need to flow to make a video for. And then, just a bunch of other stuff to flow still too, to get up on there. But that Ford head, 2 Ford heads, you'll get to see a video of representation on, or review, and just a bunch of stuff. But for sure, the small block Ford thing's probably going to air on Friday, or if this. So this will probably actually be on Sunday, the update on this, to see what it did. But in the comments, why don't you take a guess after you listen to part of this video so you can make a more educated guess on what horsepower do you think this will make, and then what RPM as well. So let's start and talk about this engine. This is a 406 small block Chevy, and this one originally was built for the Engine Master Challenge in 2012. Matter of fact, the highest I finished in any of the Engine Masters was essentially with this engine. I finished 6th with this one. And at that time, pretty much the bottom end was the same. Same piston, same rod, same crank, which is a CP flat top piston. It's got 043, 3mm rings. And then it has scat 6 1/8 inch rod, I-beam with the ARP 2000 cap screw, scat 4340 super light crankshaft, and is a 406, a 375 stroke. That's pretty much the bottom end. The compression ratio is 11.5 to 1. It does have a salt roller camshaft, and that's probably one of the bigger changes on this. The heads are a 10X RI head. This is a special one. See, this is 10X, but it's not normal. See that little star? It's because it's a special raised up one. Really raised up. These heads are amazing for the size that they are. So they do flow a lot of air, but they don't flow. There's a bunch of heads that probably flow more than this, especially being raised runner, but as small as they are, they move a lot of air. So, it has the same heads that it had before dynoed with. It has Jesel shaft rockers, and listen to me closely on the rocker ratio. 1.85 on the intake, 1.85 intake ratio, 1.7 on the exhaust. And the intake has been changed, and it's Brodix MS91. So here's how it originally was dynoed for the Engine Masters. The short block was the same. The heads were sort of the same. But the camshaft in it was a 244, 248. So it only had a 4-degree split from intake to exhaust. And it was on a 104 lobe separator, LSA. And I think I installed it at 100. And I used that because on the Engine Master Challenge, it gave a lot of torque when it rolled in, and it helped it score better. So that was a real good deal. It only had 650 lift, even with that rocker ratio for that. So, and that's how it done. It was on 3 different dynos, so I'm gonna go ahead and tell you all of them. And with a 750 carburetor on Dunsworth Machine dyno, which is Superflow 902, and he's in Enid, Oklahoma, it made 632 and 576 foot-pounds of torque. And it made like 477 at like 2,500 RPM. Took it to the Engine Masters, it made 616, so it actually made a little bit lower. You might be asking yourself, why? Well, here's part of the reason why. This is a crazy story for you. See how it's a belt drive? This is a power bond dampener, but originally it had a Professional Products harmonic balancer on it. And even though it was SFI approved, the outer ring, which is this part, decided it wanted to leave. And what was happening, it was going back and forth, and was actually hitting the bolts up here on the belt drive during the competition. It was throwing off sparks. So due to that, I couldn't do any tuning. I was afraid to make any more pulls because I knew that the dampener was trying to come off. Remember, if you tell them to stop during the pull or anything like that, you're done. And I didn't want to throw away such a great score. I was hoping it would make it through the pulls, which it did. But I wasn't going to add extra ones onto it to try to tune more into it, because I think it was only like 5 or 6 more points to get me into 5th and maybe 12 to get me into 4th. But I couldn't because I was afraid that the dampener would just come, the outer ring would just come off and it wouldn't be good. So anyway, it made 616 at the competition. Probably could have made 630 with some little bit more tuning, which would have matched the home dyno. The torque, by the way, was the same at 576. Made that both at home. After the competition, because at the competition we were limited to a 750 carburetor, the engine kind of set, and then I sold it. And you might say, why did you sell the engine? Well, I sold it because at the time, the only race car I had was the Camaro, and the Camaro was set up for a big block, and I wasn't going to make it, put a small block in it and make it run slower. So I sold it. And the guy I sold it to, I said, I'll go ahead and change valve springs, because at that time, the valve springs have been on for like 2 or 3 Engine Masters maybe, and they've been sitting for a while. So I changed the valve springs to Pack 1225, and then because I'd sold the carburetor, we went with a 950 quick fuel. And we re-dynoed at Gaines Grinding in Shakota. And so just the valve springs and the bigger carburetor, which was illegal for the competition. At that time, it made around, I want to say 670, and the torque was 616, which is really high. And the dyno probably reads high. I'll be warning you on that, because this is the same one that the S10's motor got dynoed on. By the way, the S10 made the same amount of horsepower as this engine. But, and remember, this one made 616 at the competition, which is kind of what the S10 showing. But it was like, this one made like 100 and something foot-pounds more of torque. Considerably more torque. So, and I've got videos of that, and I'm just going to go ahead and edit these in right now. Now, you can see from the video, you have 2 views. You have just the engine out there running, which sounds pretty good. And then you see a screen, and on the screen, I'll go ahead and warn you, it's like 540. That's not 600. You're right, because what the screen is showing is the uncorrected numbers. So even when I record this, when I go dynoing on Thursday, the screen's going to show the uncorrected numbers. Regardless, it's still correcting way higher than what it probably should have. I mean, the other 2 dynos, which I totally trust, the Engine Masters that year was tight and it said 616. Dunsworth is really tight and said 630. It's probably a 630 horsepower engine. The bigger carburetor might have added some, so maybe we can call it 640, but that's all it was making. So anyway, we're taking it back to Gaines Grinding because we had dynoed there before. So whatever number it is, we're just going to get to see if how much it improved. If it was high before, it's still going to be high after. The biggest difference is the change, how much power it made more or less. Hopefully more. So what has really been changed? And I'll go through this. First off, the heads have been. The heads were a little small anyway when I did it for the Engine Masters, obviously. There's not much that's really been changed. The guy that I had sold it to, he had driven it like on the street and put quite a few miles on it. Lots of drag strip runs, and he brought it back for me to refresh him. I was expecting a whole lot more damage, especially on the valve train side, than what I saw, because the lobes that were in there before were Comp Cam's TX lobes, which are, TK lobes, which are the most aggressive lobes that they have with that rocker ratio. And driving on the street, I would have thought it would have ate up stuff. Now, we did change, because initially had Isky red zone lifters, not with the bushing or nothing, but about 2 years of him driving, we changed to Morel Ultra Pros, and it's been running with that since. When I tore it down, those seemed fine. The only real damage that the engine really had after all the use that it had was in the heads. The valve guides were worn out, and that it was not his fault, it was mine. I had cut down the length of the guides, and when you cut down the length of the guides, it causes them to have considerably more wear. And because the guides had more wear, it also wore out the valve job. There was also some keys that was probably losing power because the valve job was worn out, it was pulling the valve up into the up higher into the seat, so it actually didn't have any lash when it came in. So there was one clue. A pair of rocker arms were also starting to fail. The bearing in them had started to go out itself. So that pair got replaced. All the rest seemed fine. So what changed that's from that is it now has a way different camshaft. The camshaft's actually right here. And my bed is over here. That's the camshaft. Now, if you look, it says 607 lift. That's calculating with the 1:5 ratio. Remember, it's 185 and 1.7. With this, now it has a 750 lift. So it went from a 650 lift to a 750 lift. The intake duration gained 4 degrees. The exhaust duration gained, so 48, 6 degrees. And the lobe separation, that's a major difference, went from a 104 to a 108. This also now does not have the TK lobes in it. It's the low shock ones, and I'm probably doing this wrong. It's probably the LMK or LSO ones, lobes in there. And that's what's put in. So that changed. The heads themselves got a little bit more work on them. I changed the guides because, like I said, they were worn out. I went to a 5/16 intake guide, and they used a tapered guide, so it narrows down. These heads don't have a vein in them, so tapering kind of seemed like would help. Also, because I ran a 5/16 guide, I changed the intake valves, and of course the exhaust valves as well too, just because I needed new ones. The 5/16 stems on the intake also made the valve itself way less, which was great. Not that it had any signs of valve train control issue, because there was 0 signs of valve flow, which was kind of shocking. But changed those, and did a little bit more port work on the heads. Biggest thing is on the short side. I've left it really fast before because I'm using it for engine masters. Changed the shape of the short side quite a bit, because I really think this is a more from the time I built this to what I am now, this shape seems to be more promising. So, but it didn't really pick up that much flow. So everything being done, all freshened up. It went from flowing 340 to 350, 353. So 13 CFM. For the most of the range, it only gained like 6 or 7 CFM. Now, the intake manifold did get changed, and before it had a dart one on it, and it had a lot of epoxy in it. It was really shrunk up. The reason for the intake change was more because parts of the epoxy were missing. Now, I didn't see any signs of it when I tore down the engine itself, but really didn't want to go through that, any kind of problem with that. So went with this Brodix MS91, which I've fully ported. That's in other videos being flown. It actually flowed better because I flowed the head with the intake attached. And this was about, I don't know, 6 CFM better than the Dart one. So there's that. The clover leaf design is removed, which wasn't from the Dart. So we'll see how that does. So that's a change. So you got cam, the head's been more worked over, the intake's changed. And the other one is the oil pan. That looks regular, but the other side has a kick out. So it's got a little bit better windage control, although there's really no windage problem with this. With the super light crankshaft all scalloped like this, there's very little. It also now has a shark tooth oil pump, which it didn't have in before. That's pretty much the rundown of the engine. It's going to use the same 950 carburetor, although it did get rebuilt by Mark Whittier, probably saying his name wrong again. And that's the rundown of the engine. Now, I'll be quite honest with you, I'm terrified of this thing right now because I did not build the short block. I know you're thinking, what? Yeah, I told you, I'm too busy with cylinder heads to do it. So I actually had someone else assemble the short block. And, well, I'm just nervous. I did the long block, so from here up, I put everything in, checked all the clearances, everything seemed fine on my end, and he gave me a spec sheet for the lower end that showed all the clearances, and they seemed fine. So hopefully everything's fine. I'm just worried wart, but the reason why I don't build engines anymore too is because I'm too much of a perfectionist. It takes way too long, and anyway, so I am scared, to be quite honest with you. After it's making, of course I am, and even on the engines I totally build, I'm worried wart when I get on the dyno because anything could break. After it's made some pools, I'm less concerned. So up until then, a little nervous. So that's the rundown of the engine. Now here's what's going to happen for the dyno, what the plan is. For those that haven't ever been, what we'll do is we'll put it on there, we'll get it warmed up and get to like 160 or so degrees. And we're varying the RPMs every now and then just to, kind of break it in. You don't have to be as worried with it since it's a roller camshaft compared to the flat tappet. Then typically what we'll do is we'll make a pull between 4,000 and 5,500 RPM. So it's not a lot. And really what you're trying to do when you make that pull is you're just making sure that the carburetor isn't out to lunch. And by the way, we'll start off with like 32 degrees of timing. As a note, if you ever do this, start with timing low, like 32. Don't start high. Start like at 32, and your carburetor, you want it to be slightly rich when you're coming in. So what I mean by that first dyno pull will make between 4 and 5,500. Well, I want it rich because as you add timing, so you go say 32 to 36, the carburetor is going to lean out. So if you're lean to start off with at 32 degrees of timing, you'll be extremely lean when you get there, and that spells problems. So we make the pull between 4,000 and 5,500, that first pull, really just to check to make sure that there's nothing going wrong. Because if there is something going wrong, you're going to catch it, hopefully, in time before it does a whole lot of damage. In other words, it kind of shows you. Another thing to see if your carburetor's off. So we'll make that, and then what'll happen is I'll take off the valve covers, check all the valve train. Because this is inevitable. On every new build that happens, the rockers and stuff is going to move after the first pull just because they're taking a set. And anyway, so that's going to change a little bit. I'll check those, make sure ain't nothing weird going on. Hopefully everything's fine. Readjust the lash from the ones that have to be. And then we'll start making more power pulls. So from that point, leaving the timing still at 32, hopefully the carburetor is close enough. We'll start making a pull up to, unless it's really rich or really lean, we won't touch it yet. We'll make another pull between 45 and 6,000. If everything's still looking good, we'll go 6,500. And then we'll see where that peaks at. So if it's still peaking, say at 6,500, maybe we'll go to 7,000. Still watching both of the air fuel ratio and make sure the valve train's correct. If there's any sign of anything sounding weird, we'll stop it and then check things and make sure the valve train itself's working out great. Once we find where peak power is, then we start kind of tuning around. Remember that is if the carburetor is close, then the first thing we won't do is touch the carburetor. So if everything's looking good, we found our peak, let's say it occurred at 6,800, valve train's looking good. Now we're gonna add timing. I'm probably gonna go 34 and make another pull. Not change anything on the carburetor. Make another pull. So in other words, initially, if the carburetor is like 12.2 to 12.5, I'm leaving it. If it's 12.8 to 13, I'm adding jet before I add timing. Anyway, so then at that point, we'll add 2 degrees and make it 34 and see if it makes any more power. Hopefully it will. And then if the air fuel ratio is still good, we will try 35 and see if it gains. And what you'll start seeing is when you add timing, you'll keep gaining. Like at first, so from 32 to 34, it might gain, and I'm just hypothetical, like 10. And then you go 35 degrees, so 1 more degree and you gain 4 horsepower. And then you go 36, it only gained 2. And at 37, it gains nothing. So what we're gonna do at that point is bring it back to 36. So what you're trying to do is, if the timing works that way, it'll keep coming up and then it won't gain any more, then it'll start losing some. And then you usually just back it off, and usually about 2 degrees. This one's probably gonna make peak power at 35 because it did before. So at that point, if the timing's right, and the carburetor is still kind of rich, got 35 in it, then I'm gonna lean the carburetor to get down to 12.8 to 13. And then hopefully it keeps that through the range. Then if that's good, once that's all set up in stone, the engine itself is pretty good, except for I'm probably gonna hook up the programmable ignition timing box at that point instead of the dyno one. And they'll have curves in the power curve where there'll be dips, and I'll try to mess with the timing during those individual sections to kind of help out the dips in those areas. Once that's done, if everything's cool, it is what it is. Usually on the dyno stuff for this, when I'm bringing different engines in, we'll start changing stuff. So it'll be like, oh, let's try a different intake, try different carburetors, maybe a different camshaft. On this, no. I'm just trying to see where it's got its power at, and that's it. So if it's making 580, yeah, I'm gonna be disappointed, but it is what it is. I really think it should be better, but First, it has to survive. Second, it has to make hopefully more power than what it made before. We like it to see it make 700 or more because it made 670-ish before. We'd like to see 700. Chances are very likely it's going to lose low-end torque. Very likely, because of the different camshaft and the intake itself, it's probably going to lose some low-end torque. But it'll probably move that torque curve up, so it'll be better. Before, I think it peaked at 6,600 RPM. So this 4 degrees of timing, it's probably I'm gonna guess this thing, 6,800. I'm really hoping for 700, but we will see. The fuel mixture we're running, before when I dynoed by was always on 91. Because I thought, well, if we dyno on 91 and they at the competition we're at 100 octane, I never have to worry about detonation. Now we're gonna have it actually it's a mix. It's a 91 octane mixed with 100 race gas, actually 110 race gas. So it should be about 100 octane. And that's what we'll dyno with, just because that's what he's gonna run and that's how it's gonna be. So now it's your turn. Make any comments you want. I will report the results after I'm done with this. Hopefully it doesn't go bad. Am I nervous? Extremely. If it blows up, I'll let you know. So if there's any problem or anything else, you'll probably hear about it, good or bad. Thanks for sticking around for this video. There will be other videos coming up, but just letting you know for that one. Oh, I'm a nervous person about this one. You guys take care.